Welcome to MudPie Podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Ryan.
And today we're joined with Terry Lovelace and a UFO extraterrestrial experiencer. And we're going to kind of get into his story and talk a little bit with him about what he did. I think this situation happened when you were serving in the Air Force, correct?
That's right.
Awesome. So I'll just turn it over to you if you want to kind of dive into the incident, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. Let me give you a brief bio first. My name is Terry Lovelace, and I'm very glad to be here today to tell you my story. I served active duty in the United States Air Force from 1973 to 1979, right after I got out of high school. After discharge from the military, I finished a bachelor's degree in psychology and a law degree at Western Michigan. Passed the bar, made my career in the law. First in private practice and later as a civil servant. I was an assistant attorney general for the United States Territory of American Samoa, and then later an assistant attorney general for the state of Vermont, a position I retired from in 2012, and then relocated from Vermont down to Dallas, where I'm at currently, to be near our kids and grandchildren. So
awesome. That's
where I am right now. My experiences go back to age 8, 11, 22, and then intermittently after that. So.
Oh, wow.
And so you've been retired for 9 years now? Is that correct?
Yes, 9 years and 21. Yes, correct.
Okay.
I'd like to hear about these first experiences, like when you were 8, they started?
Yes. Well, let me clarify that. I had nightmares as a child. I mean, like screaming, terrible nightmares. And it sounds ridiculous, but in my nightmares, there were these, they weren't nightmares. I knew they weren't nightmares. There were, a swirl of shadows in my room, and then 4 little monkeys would step out of the shadows. Now, in the back of my first book, Incident at Devil's Den, in the epilogue, I left an email address and I said, look, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but if you've had a similar experience to mine, and when you were a child, 4 to 6, 7 years old, if you had dreams, weird experiences that you can recall, I'd like to hear about it. I'd like to hear your story. Well, I've got 1,400 emails since March 10th of 2018. So, and a core group of about 400 of them are really very cool stories. And they involve people that saw things similar to what I saw, but they weren't all monkeys. They were diminutive clowns, small gray guys, owls, orbs, deer. One kid that I put in my second book, his story, from El Paso, Texas, saw a raccoon that walked on 2 legs and spoke to him telepathically.
Whoa.
Orbs of light, all kinds of things you can imagine. So.
And these were all these people had the experience around that same age as well?
Yes, in that same. And what's cool is that the demographics, I thought these would be mostly younger people, but they're not. They're mostly people age 50 and above. And what's interesting is, at age 50, they can't recall family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas, anything like that. But these dreams that they had at age 4, 5, and 6 are as fresh in their memory now as they were, back in the day. Yeah. So that was my experience, was with the monkeys. Now, the first thing that I saw with my own 2 eyes, outside in an objective situation, was I was in my backyard in St. Louis City in 1963. I was 8 years old. A relative had given me an adult bow and arrow target set. Why he would give me something so lethal, and my parents let me play with it, I have no idea, but That's what I had. And I'm living in an urban environment in South St. Louis City, in old row houses. So I got people, all around me. It's a beautiful May day. There are women out hanging up laundry, men cutting grass. I hear, cars, trucks, dogs, cats, kids. You know, it's a real act because it's a beautiful May afternoon. And I'm shooting arrows into this bale of hay, and I'm looking down and I'm loading an arrow into the notch of my bowstring. And as I'm looking down, I saw this perfectly round shadow move across my feet. And my first thought was, there's not a cloud in the sky. And I looked up, and over my head, probably 50 feet, is this beautiful, perfectly circular, highly polished aluminum or whatever, metallic object, kind of wobbling just the slightest bit directly over my head.
How
in the
big
middle
was
of the
it?
day?
Probably 30 feet in diameter. I mean, I'm guessing it's been a long time ago. That's what I would guess. And it was, it really wasn't just a sighting. It was a really full sensory experience. Let me explain that. My first impression when I saw it was like, wow, you know, this is cool. And I mean, it was, you know, the word sexy really wasn't in my vocabulary
Right.
at the time, but it was like the way I would describe a new Alfa Romero on a showroom floor. You know, it had that quality to it.
Did it have a sound to it at all?
No, it's absolutely silent. There were some, it's interesting you say that, there were some auditory changes immediately. As soon as I laid eyes on it, the sounds in the neighborhood became muffled. It was like I pressed my hands, both hands against my ears. And the speech and the noise seemed to be muted and maybe slowed.
Wow, that's
And,
interesting.
I felt a electrical charge in the air, and caught a scent of that ionized air, you know, like you get after a thunderstorm. The fine hairs on my forearm stood up. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm excited. There's not an ounce of fear, but I'm thrilled to death. I'm really excited. I dropped my bow and arrow, and I don't know why, but I had the impression, the compulsion to lie down on the ground, lie down on the grass and look up at it, thinking I could get a better perspective. That really doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what I did. I had someone in the UFO community tell me that likely what happened was that I had been abducted and then dropped down and lay flat on my back, but I don't remember that. I remember being on the ground, but I really don't. I remember having the compulsion to lie on the ground, but I don't really recall getting on the ground. But that's where I was. And I watched this thing for a few minutes, I don't know, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. And it kind of listed the starboard a little bit and shot off to clear the power lines. And I mean, from 0 to 500 miles an hour, and just left a hole in the sky. I don't mean a literal hole. I mean, a spot in the blue sky where it disappeared.
And
so
how
this
old
took
did you
place
say
in the
you were?
middle of the day, like
2:00 in the afternoon.
2:00 in the afternoon. Wow.
People all around. People
Did
everywhere.
anybody else
soul.
see that?
Not a soul. Not a soul. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Mom!" You know.
Yeah.
And my mother, she admits later, she thinks, you know, I probably shot somebody in the head with an arrow. You know, she comes running out, and I'm screaming. I don't recall screaming, but I must have been, because I was hoarse afterward. And she comes out, checks me for blood, and I'm excited. I'm like, "Mom, did you see it? It was a flying saucer." You know, UFO wasn't in a lexicon yet, but I said, "It's a flying saucer. Did you see it?" And you know, 1960s really were a different time. She's like, "You stop that! Stop saying that! Do not say that!" You know, my dad later on would pull me aside and say, "Now, son, you can't tell people that you saw a flying saucer. They'll think there's something wrong with you. They'll think there's something wrong with us." And that's kind of that 60s mentality. But you know, lots of shows on back then. Surprising large number of shows, like My Favorite Martian. There were cool cartoons, Space Ghost.
They were still riding that Roswell action, because that had only been what, a decade and a half maybe later.
Yeah, not that long ago.
Yeah.
Not that long ago. And Sputnik was a new thing. Space was kind of a new frontier. So I think it's kind of a natural evolution to have that interest. But something more.
You said you were kind of fascinated with it when you saw it in the daytime, but now when you had the experiences where you see these monkeys or the things that you had seen when you were sleeping, were you also not scared, or did you have fear in those? And
that was kind of a mixed bag. I never associated the flying saucer with the monkeys, although I'm sure there's a connection. But at the age of 8, I just couldn't reconcile that. The monkeys I thought of as being monsters or something. But what's interesting is memories have returned. Writing the book and speaking about these events publicly have kind of opened a door. And I've had memories come back that I believe are genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And when the monkeys used to come, the object of the exercise was, this I recall plainly, was they would always ask me, matter of fact, it's a nightmare I've had for 40 plus years, 50, I don't know, a long time. Monkey would hold out its paw and say, come on, Terry, we're going to go play. The monkey closest to the head of my bed. And sometimes I think I went without protest. And other times I would think, no, this isn't right. And I would scream my head off. But the nightmare that I have and have had is that in the dream, I'm 6 years old again, and I'm in my bed. And this monkey is there, and it holds out this paw, but it's not a paw anymore. It's 4 long, ugly fingers. And then when I look up, it's not a monkey. It's a gray. It's a gray alien. And that just, I flip out. I mean, every time that is a nightmare. So.
Did you have any issues after that first experience outside when you were 8, as far as kind of like coping with daily stuff? I feel like that's pretty heavy for a kid to have an experience like that and then be told, you can't talk about it. Or
what was heavy was I was a very straight kid. I didn't lie. I didn't make stuff up. I got good grades. I had a good reputation. The fact that my parents were so dismissive about it was hard for me to wrap my head around. I made the decision, boy, when I have kids, I'm going to listen to them. And I did, I think times are different now too. There's a different cultural mindset. And even in the last few years, I published my book on Amazon March 10th, 2018. And that's the first time I really became openly public about what happened to me. And because I knew that there would be.
That's when you first started talking about it, like started being open about it. It was in 2018.
Yes, I made the decision the day that it hit Amazon, I would speak publicly about it, speak at conferences, talk about it. Because prior to that, I'd kept it secret because I'd been a member of the legal community for so long that, there are some professions like academia, air traffic controller, law enforcement. You just don't talk about those kind of things because they're not seen as reality. And those professions, are grounded in reality. Mm-hmm. And I expected a backlash, and I wasn't disappointed. I had friends call me from all over the world, say, "Have you lost your mind? What is wrong with you? Why are you writing science fiction?" Well, it's not science fiction. It's nonfiction. Thank you. And no, I haven't lost my mind, but I did lose a fair amount of friends, or people I thought were my friends. But there's a flip side to that, and that is that there's a genuine community of people here, a UFO culture in this society. And I've made far more friends in the UFO community than I ever made in the legal community.
Yeah, open-minded people tend to be a lot better
Absolutely.
People, I think.
Yes, less judgmental.
Yeah, and just, when you're able to when you're open to new things, you can have way better conversations. You're not so focused on judging someone else because of what they think. You're more apt to learn things. It's just a better environment in general, just to have a little bit of an open mind
Couldn't
about a
agree
thing
more.
you could possibly never, there's no way to just to hold on to these weird beliefs about what can and can't be out there. We have no idea. We live on a small, tiny planet in the middle of, we know nothing. Now, after that incident when you were 8, when was the next time, or was there a next time? You said 11. Was that the next time that you had another experience with this, or were you still having dreams after that encounter or that sighting?
That sighting was kind of a pivotal point in that the monkey men seemed to stop. I did have and I described that in the second book. I did have one experience later that had a dreamlike quality to it, but I believe that it's real. And I was taken and had a clinical medical interaction with insectoid-like thing.
Mm.
Now, when I was younger, I have memory of being taken to a white round room. This is where the monkey men would take me. I have no idea how I got there, but when I went with them, it was almost like they were seeking my permission to go. Well, it was like they were seeking my permission to go. But when I went with them, once I got to where we were going, I always had fun. I enjoyed myself. There were a group of kids there that I didn't recognize from school or from the neighborhood, all around my age. And there was a Asian-looking woman, very, very petite, who was kind of in charge and kind of ran the thing.
Like a perfectly human-looking person?
No, I don't think she was human. Back then, I didn't understand the distinction, to be honest with you.
Mm.
But her features were more Asian quality than they were. And that's the best descriptive term I can give. And but her head was the back of her head was bulbous, was bigger. She definitely had some non-human qualities to her.
Okay.
But I felt a fond affection for her. I mean, not a romantic way, but in kind of like a maternal way. And that's a memory that I have. The next experience that I had was at age 11. I saw a UFO a second time. And it was a bitterly cold January night. I mean, probably below zero. And I was in my room and I saw these flashing lights come through my window. My first thought was, fire truck, right? And but they were yellow, green, and white. And we had on thick drapes covering Venetian blinds. Because it was, 120-year-old house, drafty. Yeah. So I hop out of bed, I pull back the curtains, and I open the Venetian blinds, and I'm looking out, expecting to see a fire truck. And there's a saucer like right outside my bedroom window, my second-story bedroom window. If I could have raised the window, I could have stepped on top of it.
Whoa!
And
so
I remember,
it was kind of low.
Yeah, it was. It had to be very antique, kind of tall windows, and underneath this thing, now it was bitterly cold, but there was this fog underneath, dense fog, and I'm looking at it, and I'm not fearful, but I'm not overly excited either. But I do feel this big satisfaction, lots of satisfaction at being able to see the top side of it, because there was a dome-shaped structure in the middle of the disc, and that's where the light came from.
And you said there were windows?
No, I was talking about my window, my bedroom.
Oh, your window. Okay.
Looking out. I couldn't see really a window, but it was different colored. It was darker than the gray of the rest of the saucer. But that's where the light emitted from. But I didn't see a window per se. Okay. What I did do is I took the curtain, the drape, and I stuffed it into the slat of the Venetian blind, so I could sit there kind of with a hands-free posture and look at it. And I watched it, and then I felt this kind of disinterest, like, well, that's cool. And I also felt this real satisfaction, like, I knew that they didn't come to see, they didn't come here by happenstance. I mean, they came to see me. I had that feeling. It's not, they didn't make a wrong turn at Albuquerque and just end up here. They were here intentionally. And I felt smug about that in a way. And I certainly didn't tell another human being about it until 2018.
What do you think they wanted?
The first and second visit, I think, was just to let me know that they're there. Reaffirm that they're real.
And that second time, that ship wasn't doing, or that object wasn't doing anything. It was just in place right there.
Just static, just there.
Wow.
And you know what? I woke up in the morning. When I first woke up the next morning, for a second, I didn't remember it happening. But then as soon as I saw the window, I saw that curtain had been tucked in and the Venetian blinds were open, and it just came flooding back. And I knew that was a genuine memory and not,
Wow.
And it was the same kind of ship as in size and all that as that first experience?
Identical.
Wow.
I mean, I remember thinking I could be looking at the exact same ship that I saw, 3 years earlier.
Yeah.
And then I had 11 years afterward with not a thing happen. So a nice long hiatus, a rest.
So how is that, seeing it a second time as an 11-year-old? Now you're able to kind of understand more things. You're still young, but you have this now second experience of the same object, same feelings. So what was that like going forward?
That was, I felt special, I mean,
Honestly, I would too.
Yeah, I don't want to sound boastful about it, but I did. I felt like whoever they were, they came there to see me, and I was very privileged and honored that they did. So, and I saw them as good. I saw them as, at the worst, being benign. I mean, yeah.
That's insane. All right. So what happened next? So now you're 11, and then your next experience with these things would be what, later as an adult now?
Yes, 1977.
Wow, long time.
I'm active, 11-year hiatus. 1977, I'm 22 years old. I'm an NCO in the Air Force. I enlisted in the Air Force in 1973, right out of high school, stayed for 6 years before I got out and finished my education. And I was trained as a medic. I was a conscientious objector. I wanted to be a non-combatant. So they made me a medic, and then I was trained as an EMT and went to work at Whiteman Air Force Base, which is east of Kansas City. And back when I was there, it was a remote location. There was nothing around. And it was a SAC base, Strategic Air Command base, back when I was there, with a squadron of nuclear-armed B-52s. And scattered throughout this remote farmland, they had a squadron of Minuteman II ICBM missiles, all, aimed at the Soviet Union, I'm sure. So it was a nuclear base. Still is a nuclear base today. It's no longer, SAC no longer exists, but today it's home to the B-2 stealth bombers. And I worked the midnight shift in the emergency room at Whiteman Air Force Base from 11 o'clock p.m. to 8 in the morning. And I worked for 3 years with my friend Tobias, or Toby, and we worked together. And we were the only two really that wanted to work the night shift. Nobody else really wanted it. We loved it. We thought it was great. We were both taking evening classes at the Extension University on base, and there were fewer officers around. There was nobody there. Really, we were pretty much on our own. I mean, if nothing was going on, we could play cards. We'd drink a pot of coffee, nice night. We'd sit outside and watch the night sky. My friend Toby was an amateur astronomer, and he could point out like constellations and name stars, and he could time, and there weren't a lot of satellites in the air in 1977, but he could time a satellite when it would appear, when it would come over, within a minute or two. And that was a routine thing, I'm sure, because, you know, we wave and say hi to the Russians, you know, because no doubt that's what they were. But we not only worked together, we were best of friends. We were both fairly newly married. We were both living in family housing on the base. And his wife and my wife were best of friends. And you know, on our days off, we'd, you know, barbecue or play cards, you know, socialize, just do normal stuff. But, you know, we were friends. And one night about 2 a.m., and this would have been, I believe, late April of 1977, my friend says, "Hey, man, I got an idea. Let's go camping." And I'm like, camping, you know. I'm like, you know, look, Toby, I know that I've never been camping. I'm a city kid. I said, you're from Flint, Michigan. I don't think you've ever been camping. So, you know, what's this all about? And he says, no, man, think about it. Because I had a reputation. I was an amateur photographer. I had a little dark room set up in my house. I could develop black and white prints.
Oh, cool.
And I had a nice camera, a new camera with a bunch of lenses and filters and stuff I wanted to try out, 35 millimeter, of course. But you know, living on a nuclear base, there's not a lot of photo ops. I mean, you know, you walk around with a camera, you're going to get arrested. So he said, you know, and he knew that I wanted to photograph wildlife. So he says, man, this is a really cool state park. We can go, you can take pictures of wildlife. And he had heard that there was this elevated plateau where he could go with zero light pollution and watch the night sky. Because his goal was to complete a degree in physics and then go on graduate school to astronomy or cosmology. He was a very bright kid. And so I was against the idea at first, but he sold me, and we're like, okay, let's go. And let's plan for our trip, right? I mean, you know, this is 1977. Again, nobody used the word nerd back in the day, but we were kind of like the nerds of the squadron, if you know what I mean. You know, how do two nerds go about doing anything they've never done before? Well, you know, you make a list, right? You make a list and you do research. And this was before the days of Google, so we went to the base library and thought we could find a book on how to camp. And we found
they didn't have camping for dummies back then.
They didn't. And that's exactly what we needed. We found the 1958 Boy Scout manual, and we're excited, like, oh boy, you know, now we got this nailed, right? So check it out. Go over to Toby's house. He's got a, you know, legal pad and a pen. And I'm like, okay, let's see. Here's snaring rabbits, skinning rabbits, you know, taxidermying rabbits, tying nautical knots. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, we had no idea, but by the time they get to be Boy Scouts, they'd been camping probably since they were Cub Scouts. So neither one of us had ever been, obviously. So no help. But we figured it out. I mean, it wasn't rocket science. We bought a cheap tent, some blow-up air mattresses, borrowed some blankets from the hospital, and packed a few things. And we went drove 6.5 hours south to the northwest corner of Arkansas to Devil's Den State Park. Devil's Den State Park, there's a major roadway that cuts through and divides. On the left, on the west side, is Devil's Den State Park, and on the right is it's all federal land. It's the Ozark National Forest. So we made the decision that we weren't going to stay at the campground. I wanted to stay at the campground because electricity, running water, showers, all that stuff. And my friend made a valid point. He's like, you know, if we stay in the campground, it's going to be like camping in Walmart's parking lot. You know, you're going to have people to the right of you, people to the left of you. They're going to be, you know, children and other undesirables running around. And, you know, forget that. Let's be outdoorsmen, right? So we went from zero camping experiences to like being like Lewis and Clark all of a sudden, you know. And we made the drive down there. And there were a series of missteps along the way. in that I forgot I had a camera bag packed with, all kinds of great film, filters, stuff I really wanted to try out. I had a hand axe and a camp lantern and some fuel that a neighbor lent to me. And I left all of it at home.
Oh, no.
So fortunately, my friend Toby had a camera in his backpack. So we had a camera anyway. But yeah, we weren't that inept. I mean, he forgot some things too. And it was just out of character for us to be that inept. But I don't know.
Just out of curiosity, how big was this camera that he would have been packing in the 70s, you said?
Yeah, 120 Instamatic.
Oh, okay.
Something great for birthday parties, but for photographing a UFO, not great. But as close as the thing, well, I'll get into that. But yeah, at least we had something to take along with us.
Yeah.
So we were going to try to find this piece of high ground that Toby had heard of secondhand. And we got to the park, we dodged the ranger station and took a road. And my friend kind of, now he had a good sense of direction, but intuitively he kind of was like, make a right here, make a right here, make a left here. And he had a pen and like a bank envelope that he got out of my glove box, or not a pen, a pencil, like a golf pencil. And he's drawn a little map just so he's sure we can get out of there. Because there are no landmarks. It's just road and trees on either side. So we got to a place in the road. It degraded from pavement to rocks to just a dirt road. And there was a chain across the road with a very sternly worded sign that said, stop, no entry, no hunting, camping, trespassing, fishing, basically stay out of here. And there was a chain across, the sign was attached, metal sign attached to a chain across the road to a post on the opposite side. And I'm like, oh man, we got to turn around and find another way. And my friend's like, no, wait a minute. And from the passenger side, he could see that what they'd done was they'd taken this chain and just looped it on itself with a padlock and then draped it over a post on the opposite side on a nail. So he's like, hang on, man, I got this. And he gets out and he picks it up, he drops chink, it falls to the ground. And we drive in, and now we really feel like Lewis and Clark, right?
He's like, what sign? I didn't see a sign anywhere.
Yeah, we thought, what are they gonna do? Kick us out?
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Who cares? Let's go have our adventure. And we had an adventure, all right. So we drove, and we could see in the distance this plateau, which is still there, by the way. It's still there, and
you sent us pictures, I believe, right?
I believe I sent you pictures.
And
and we're gonna add them in afterwards too.
Yeah, we'll show them for sure.
What's interesting is the top of this plateau is it should be covered with 40-year-old mature trees by now, and there's not a tree on it. I mean, it's also interesting. It's roughly triangular shaped.
Mm-hmm.
I described
It's
it in the
big
book.
though, right?
It's very big.
Like it looks huge.
It is huge. And when I put the pictures on my Facebook page, I got a follower who's a landscaper down in Alabama. And he says, I can see tractor marks. And he says, I can see that grass has been cut at a length of about 8 inches. He says, somebody takes a brush hog up there and cuts that on a regular basis. Now, why would the U.S. government, on a piece of land owned by the U.S. government, managed by the Bureau of Land Management, burn all that gas for 50 years to cut the top of a plateau in the middle of nowhere?
That's a good question.
Interesting. Yeah.
LZ.
So we crested we went up this steep incline, we crested it, and I call it a meadow in the book. It looked like a meadow. It was just this expanse of late blooming wildflowers and maybe knee-high grass. And it was gorgeous. It really was an absolutely beautiful place. And we looked at each other like, oh yeah, this is great, right? And we set up camp on the side by the tree line and just had a beautiful view and had a nice hike, had some adventures I won't go into for brevity's sake. And just kind of, we kind of did all the fun stuff you do when you go camping, without even much forethought. I mean, we, burned some hot dogs and ate a bag of chips and did a hike. And then toward the evening after sunset, we're kicked back on these air mattresses with a little campfire between us and a tent in back of us. So we're there and we're just talking and laughing and really enjoying our evening, right? And we're young, we're in good shape. We're two guys who are used to working the night shift. So yeah, we're a little tired from the drive, but other than that, we're good to go. We're having fun. Mm-hmm. And there came a lull in our conversation. And I noticed that the crickets, the tree frogs, all the insects in the forest that had been so loud just 15 minutes earlier had all gone silent. And it was quiet. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. And it wasn't only silent, it was still, because we'd had a nice breeze going, and that had stopped even. And I recall that, the flames from the campfire and the smoke now, there was no wind affecting them at all. And it unnerved me. And I asked my buddy, of course, like he's going to know, but I asked him anyway, hey man, is this normal? Is this, it's awful quiet out here. And he blows it off and he's like, yeah, man, look, we've been making a lot of noise. We've just quieted them. They'll be back, nothing to worry about. So we picked up where we left off and we're kind of like talking, chat, just having a good time. And he turns his head to the left and he's focused on something. And I'm just about to ask him, about to say, what are you looking at? And he asked me first, he says, hey, Terry, were those lights there before? And I didn't know of any lights. I said, what lights? What are you talking about? And I couldn't see because his torso was in the way we were situated. So I had to stand up and kind of take a step back. And then I could see in the western horizon, there were 3 tiny stars in a tight little triangle sitting just above the horizon. And I look at them and I'm like, boy, that's strange. What are those? They were too far above the horizon to have been lights like from a train or from a parking lot or something. Mm-hmm. So I had no clue what they were. But I'm looking at him, he's looking at him, and he says, well, you know what, wait a minute. He says, maybe this is just an illusion that it's static because it's on the same, it's headed right for us. And, if we just watch it for a minute or two, it'll change its course by a degree or two, and then we'll be able to see it for what it's worth. And I'm like, okay. So we're watching this thing, and it doesn't move. A few minutes go by, and then what it does is it rotates. And it turned like the 3 stars turn like they were on an axis. And they operated like they were one solid object, not 3 objects moving in unison, but one solid object. And it rotated. And it rotated in such a way that it aligned, if you can picture the triangle, the base of the triangle was aligned parallel with the horizon, with the apex pointed up into the sky. So we were pretty excited about that. And then just a few seconds later, it started to move up. And that got us really excited. And then
how far away was it when it lined up and then it started going up? Was it the same distance as when you first saw it?
Yeah, it was the same distance, and it was on the horizon. It was dark, and I had no landmarks, so I'm guessing 26 miles roughly, being the distance from my vantage point to the horizon, and then kind of compensating for the elevated height of the plateau. Our plateau was such that when we were on top of it, we were level with the treetops of the thick forest all around us. It's still that way today.
Just out of curiosity, when you're at ground level, can you see the top of the plateau at all, or is it like everything up there is completely invisible? Like it's
kind of hidden by the forest unless you're close to it. So you have to be close to it to see it. Otherwise, it's absolutely hidden.
Okay.
So what's curious is, I had been fearful when it went quiet. And then my emotions went from being fearful to being inquisitive to being excited. And then I felt once this thing started to move and do its ascent, I felt this wave of calm wash over me. And this is very distinctive, no missing. It was very much like mild sedation. And I felt no fear. I felt no excitement. And I felt that mild disinterest. And it immediately took me back to the feeling that I had back when I was age 11. When I'm looking at this UFO outside of my second-story bedroom window and flashing lights, and I felt that disinterest almost, and just turned around and went back to bed. That makes no sense. But I felt that same kind of almost disinterest. I wouldn't go as far to say apathy, but disinterest. I wish I had better descriptive words, but I felt more like an observer than a participant here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's...
It's so strange because I hear from a lot of like people that experience these really personal UFO experiences, not just like, okay, I see them like way off all the time, but like more personal, that a lot of these people have this same calming feeling. They describe a lot, like it feels like someone put a glass jar over them, and so it like muffles the sound and kind of adds, it seems like you're in like your own little bubble, which separates you from the world. And I'm always curious as to, you know, all these old ancient stories of using like vibrations or sound frequencies to like sedate or like calm people down. And a lot of stories with UFOs have that same feeling or that same sense. And I'm just, I don't know, I've always thought whether it's like them producing some kind of sound or whether they're giving off some kind of vibration that allows us to be in, like put into that state, because that story is so like fairly common with that feeling.
You know, I never realized that. And I'll tell you, I avoided anything in the UFO topic or even the sci-fi topic until I decided to write this book and really went to work on it in earnest in 2017. But like I say, I put my email address in the back of the epilogue of Incident at Devil's Den, and I got just deluged with emails from people. And I found out it was very validating for me because I found out that, you know, my situation was not all that unusual. This has happened to a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people, you know, a lot of very credible people. So it was a good thing. But yeah, I'm not as unique in any way, shape, or form as I thought I was.
That's crazy. What's also interesting too is the location of it, because there's a lot of paranormal, a lot of alien, a lot of disappearances in the Ozark National Forest. Like there's massive cave systems there. There's a lot of things that happen in that particular region of America, as far as all these like sightings, which is crazy.
Can I just give you three real quick examples?
Yeah.
You know, when I wrote the book, I decided to do some research on Devil's Den. So, you know, I found out like David Paulides, who wrote the Missing 411 series, you know, contacting the Department of Parks and Recreation in Little Rock, Arkansas will get you nowhere, you know, and, you know, you can send a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, and, you know, they'll pretty much tell you we don't have anything. And, you know, your options are take them to federal court. You know, do I want to do that? I mean, I know how to do that, but am I going to do that? No, I don't think so. You're on your own for information. But the first story that I found came out of the Pittsburgh Press, dated 1946. And it was by a family called Van Alst, V-A-N, second word, A-L-S-T, maybe Dutch in origin, I'm guessing. And it was a family of 5, 2 boys and a girl who was 7. And they were traveling from Pittsburgh to El Paso, Texas to visit relatives, and spent the night at Devil's Den State Park. And they were pulling a camper behind them. There was kind of an uptick in the camping, became kind of a mini craze. And right after post-war, 46, 47, 48, those years. So they had stopped at Devil's Den State Park at the campground to spend the night. And they spent the night. The next morning, you know, mom's putting breakfast on the table. Kids are running around the camper like kids will do. And 2 boys pop out, and there's no Catherine. And Mom says, boys, where's your sister? And we're like, well, she's right here. I don't know. I don't know. And she's like, annoyed, go find your sister. So they do the usual. They go to the bathrooms, they go to the kiosk, and they can't find her anywhere. So they come back, we can't find her. So Mom gets alarmed. She wakes up the old man. They start a search. They get other campers involved. By noon, the park rangers are there. By late afternoon, there is a huge search going on. And they started an official search that lasted for 7 days. On the 7th day, it was to transition from a rescue to a recovery mission. And they had a bunch of volunteers from, they had the Civil Air Patrol out of Little Rock, Coleman, the area looking for her. They had a whole bunch of University of Arkansas students. They're volunteering their time to help search for her. And this is in David Paulides' book, his 4th volume called The Devil is in the Details. And but these are my facts from the newspaper articles. There's also an article in the Kansas City Star. They had relatives in the Kansas City Star and it made the press there. So this university volunteer by the name of Chadwick is walking along the top of this precipice several miles from the campsite. And it's a high precipice. It goes up almost 700 feet. And to get to the top of this thing, you have to take this rugged zigzag trail across a rocky terrain. And this little girl is in a bathing suit and flip-flops. He gets to the top, he calls out her name. And this area, by the way, had been searched 3 times prior to this. He calls out her name, and a little girl walks out from under a limestone overhang and says, here I am.
What?
Yeah. And this guy is just, he breaks down. He's like, oh my God, you're okay. He picks her up and she's like, yeah, I'm fine. Where have you been? And she says, I don't know. I woke up. I've been waiting for you to come get me.
Jeez.
Wow.
So take her back, reunite her with her family. What's interesting is the mother in the Pittsburgh Press article described her mood as, quote, eerily calm.
Yeah.
Strange choice of words. Her hair was clean. She hadn't lost an ounce of weight. And despite the fact there was no potable water anywhere near where she was found, she wasn't the least bit dehydrated. I tried to find her. I'm sorry, go ahead.
When you're on anesthesia, I feel like sometimes with these, this like calm feeling of people not remembering, like if they got abducted or anything. I mean, we as humans experience that when we come out of surgery, when we come out of the hospital under any type of anesthesia. We have that same similar type of like feeling. We don't know what just happened. It's super fuzzy. Everything felt like a dream. I'm kind of calm and relaxed now.
Yeah, there's a drug called Versed. It's commonly used. And Versed they'll give you because it's, number one, it's an anesthetic, it's a hypnotic, but it also has an amnesic quality to it. So, you won't remember.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I get it. I do perfect analogy.
It's crazy.
So, second story I want to tell real quick, and then because I want to have time to tell a story about our abduction.
Well, we have all the time too. Like we can go as long as you want.
We can go all day if you need to.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Well, I want to squeeze these in because they're so relevant.
Sweet.
So I found that 1946 article, but I had nothing to fill in between the gaps because it's most of it's not released. It's not publicized. But I found an article in a Northeast Arkansas Gazette, and I have links to it in my second book, I think in the first book too. But there had been in 2017, earlier in that year, there had been a young woman, 28 years old, by the name Monica Murphy, who had gone to top of a limestone cliff and jumped off and committed suicide. And it was ruled a suicide by the medical examiner, but still it was a questionable death. And then the second incident was a disappearance. That happened in August of 2017. A 32-year-old young man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, named Rodney Letterman, was at the park with a friend, and they were walking on what's called the Butterfield Trail. The name goes back to 1859 when there was a trail there for the a stagecoach line by the same name that ran along the trail. Now today, it's still the Butterfield Trail, but it's paved. It's a nice walkway for hikers and the like. So Rodney and his friend get there from Bartlesville, Oklahoma. They're on the trail. They're taking a walk. Rodney has asthma and realizes that he's short of breath. And he's like, hey, and asks his friend, I screwed up. I left my inhaler back in the truck. Would you mind running back and getting it for me? His friend's like, yeah, cool, no worries. So his friend runs back to the truck and gets Rodney's inhaler, comes back, gone, maybe 20 minutes. When he gets back, all he finds is Rodney Letterman's cell phone lying on the ground. And there are other people around. It's not like they're the only two in the park. Mm-hmm. So he thinks, boy, that's odd. And then he calls for Rodney and gets no answer. He thinks, well, maybe he went to relieve himself in the woods or something, give it 10 minutes. And he's calling his name and he doesn't come. And so he gets worried. He contacts the ranger's office, who reacts immediately, by the way, and came out. And kind of the same thing as with Catherine Van Alst. They institute a massive search that lasts 7 days. And then afterward, the family paid for trackers and volunteer searchers through October. But during the 7-day official search, they had National Guard and state police helicopters equipped with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, that could detect a heat signature. And no Rodney Letterman. I mean, no sign of the guy. So when I published Incident at Devil's Den, I said, look, this is the guy's right now is just MIA and no one knows what happened to him. But if I find out in the future, I'll update you in my second book. So in March of 2019, a year after I published Devil's Den, news broke that there was a couple walking along the Butterfield Trail, and there was a log, very obvious, very visible to anyone walking the trail. And there was something on top of the log, and the woman says, is that an albino turtle? And he's like, yeah, it's crazy. Let's check it out. And they walk over to this log, and they picked up what was actually the top of Rodney Letterman's skull, bleached white by the sunshine. And verified by the medical examiner in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, that it indeed was Rodney Letterman's skull. And that was the only remains they ever found of Rodney Letterman.
They didn't find blood. They didn't find anything.
Nothing. No clothes, no shoes. Lots of times they discover shoes, but nothing. That's the only thing.
Do you know if this skull was the edges of the skull? Did it look like it was naturally broke, or did it look like it was specifically cut?
Unfortunately, I didn't get to see it.
Okay.
I got the story from a unnamed Russellville, Arkansas police person, okay, who told me the story, and I was able to verify it through another source. And it also made the newspaper in the Arkansas Gazette and a couple others. I don't know. I'm assuming that it was kind of oval, something that could be mistaken for a turtle. But yeah, I'd love to know if it had been broken or if it was just
like a clean cut of some kind.
Yeah. Was it found in the same park?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was found not only in the same park, but on the same trail where Rodney had disappeared.
Do you know the distance between where they last saw him and where they found it was approximately?
I don't, but I would guess it had to be within a mile or two.
That's
because
insane.
the trail's not that long. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And I think it was purposefully placed there. It was placed there to be found.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it'd been found a long time ago.
See, we live in Montana, Ryan and I, and we are surrounded by massive predatory animals, right? We have giant bears, mountain lions, and all these things. And if they take you like away. They generally don't come back to a spot just to leave like a little gift of the person that they took X amount of time ago,
And you guys know, like David Paulides knows, there's an MO that goes along with predation. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know what's going on. So because I guess remains are found, clothes aren't eaten, obviously, and bloody clothes are found. And so, you know, they don't think it was predation. They don't know. They don't know what it was. They won't make an assumption. So, you know, what I did was I thought, you know, this place deserves the name Devil's Den, obviously, because it stuck, you know, back 120 years ago or more. So I found, I did some research, and I found that the Devil's Den State Park is on land that had been owned, declared by two Native American tribes, the Cato tribe, Cato, and the Kahino tribe. And I found a Cato tribal medicine woman who lived nearby, not Russellville, another little town, Wayne something. Anyway, she lives near the park. And I reached her by telephone with a little bit of research and help from friends in law enforcement. And I called her up and I said, look, you don't know me. I'm writing a book about Devil's Den, and I'm looking for, you know, some wisdom here. I know that, you know, your people used to lay claim to this land. Maybe they still do. And I wonder what you could tell me about Devil's Den. Well, it took a little bit of conversation, I think, before she relaxed and warmed up to me and trusted me. And then she said, well, yeah, I'll tell you. Devil's Den is a place that where people will transit through. In other words, they'll travel from point A to point B to get to the opposite end. But she said, we don't camp there. We don't camp there. We don't hunt there. We don't fish there. And I said, well, why is that? And she says, because it's cursed ground. Mm-hmm. And I said, how do you know that it's cursed ground? And she says, it's oral tradition. It goes back as long as anyone can remember. So I took the next step. And through Michigan State University, I was able to contact a archaeologist who worked that Ozark region and was an expert on that, and contacted him. And I'm like, I'm curious about the Devil's Den State Park. I'm curious what you found there relic-wise, what you can tell me about it. Does it date back to Neolithic times or Native American times? What do you find? And he said, you know, it's interesting. He says, all around Devil's Den, you know, Ozark National Forest, all around we find Native American artifacts, and we have found a few Neolithic points that, you know, date back 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. But he said, within the bounds of Devil's Den State Park, we've never found a thing. Not an ancient campsite, not a single stone tool, nothing. And that's curious. So, you know, David Paulides, like I said, his fourth book is called The Devil is in the Details, where he makes a connection between the name Devil, Diablo, and, you know, there's a Devil's Den in Gettysburg where there was a massacre. Mm-hmm. And there's a Devil's Tower, Devil's Glade, Devil's Lake. And all these places seem to have a dark history. And David Paulides doesn't make any assumptions, draw any conclusions. He just states statistically more people go missing if the name Devil or Diablo is mentioned in the name. So
that's crazy.
It is. It is. So back to my camping story.
Yes.
We like I say, we had engaged in conversation, and my friend sees the three stars on the horizon. I see them. They rotated like they were on an axis, aligned the base of the pyramid parallel with the horizon, and then started to move up. And that's when I felt for the first time that wave of sedation, that mild disinterest. You know, our reaction to everything that was going on was just muted. I mean, it wasn't appropriate. You know, two normal people who'd never been camping in their life would probably have been scared to death and ran to the car and got out of there. Mm-hmm. But no, we're just watching this thing play out. And it ascended and finally got to what I call a ceiling, a high point. And then it started a slow glide down. And as it was descending, it became clear that it was headed right in our direction. And it did this tumbling thing too, where the apex of the triangle would dip and then turn all the way around and do a complete somersault. So you had this weird light effect where you'd see 3 lights, then 1 light would go underneath, and then 2 lights for a second, and then the other one would come back on top. If you can visualize.
Yeah. Like a triangle just flipping over on itself.
Correct. And I don't know where this emotion came from, but I had the distinct feeling that this thing is moving with purpose. In other words, it's not something out of control. It's moving with intent.
Right.
And it descended to about 5,000 feet. And as it descended, it dimmed the lights on the points of the triangle so that they weren't quite so bright. And it glided in and then dipped a little bit. And we saw it come in right over the treetops and saw the points of light light up the 3 points of light light up the forest underneath it. And it dipped more and came to a stop directly over the plateau, what I call the meadow, and filled the entire thing. I describe it in the book as being a city block long on each leg of the triangle. I mean, it was as big as a super Walmart. I mean, it was absolutely enormous.
Wow.
And I mean, we were in a remote location, but this thing should have been seen 2 counties away.
So this was and this triangle is clearly different than the shape that you saw of the craft when you were younger. Did this one also have 0 sound, nothing, like it didn't really like disturb space around it when it moved in?
No, this one was dead quiet up to this point. That will change later, but at this point, it hasn't made a sound. And I mean, my mind is racing because I thought I was 22 years old. I thought I was the expert on UFOs. I'd seen them twice, and they were saucers both times. So what the hell is this? But I wasn't, like I said, no fear. Just we're watching this thing. We're still kicked back on air mattresses, like in a relaxed posture. And shortly after it came to a stop, and we're not exchanging conversation. We're just mesmerized looking at this thing. From underneath this thing and dead center, there came a light that just, boom, clicked on. I mean, like somebody hit a switch. This light came down, and it was about the diameter of a softball, and it was a visible white light. The effect is very much like a high-power searchlight cuts through fog. You can see a white column of light. That's what this is like. But again, it was just about 6 inches in diameter, and it landed right square in our campfire and stayed there for just maybe 60 seconds. And it turned off, again, like a switch, and then there came a second light from the same source, and this was a laser-like light. 1977, I'd only seen lasers on television, but this was about the diameter of a lead pencil. And this thing would land in a spot in a campground for maybe 1/10 of a second and then reappear in another spot. So at 10 times a second, it had been in 10 different locations. And it was doing this and just gave the illusion this light was dancing all over the campsite. And I had the thought, again, I don't know where it came from. Maybe it's just an obvious deduction that, this thing's checking us out. I mean, it's scanning us.
Sure.
This light struck me in the chest twice. I felt absolutely nothing. And that lasted a little longer, maybe a couple minutes. And then it turned off. And then we sat there in dead silence for a few minutes. And then I felt a wave. It changed from the sensation of being sedated to, man, I was sleepy. I mean, I was like, well, all I wanted to do was go to bed. And my friend was on the same page because he kind of startled me with his first words he'd spoken. And he says, "Show's over." And he picks up his air mattress and he walks over to the tent, throws it in, and just falls on top. And I'm right behind him because all I want to do is get in that tent and go to sleep. So I threw my air mattress in and I fell down on top of it. The last thought that I had was, Toby, you were wrong, man, because the crickets and the tree frogs never did come back. But that was my last thought because I was out.
Wow. And so there was no like conversation like, "Oh my God, that was awesome," or the shape of that was weird, or there's nothing?
No debriefing whatsoever.
Wow.
I mean, if you ever read, there's a great book by Raymond Fowler called The Allagash Four. And it's about twin brothers, Jack and Jim Weiner, and their two friends, last name Rack and Foltz. The four of them went on a fishing trip in Maine near the Allagash River to this big lake. And same kind of thing. They were on the lake in a canoe, and they had an encounter with a big thing in the sky, and then missing time, then boom. But no debriefing, no talking about it. It just wasn't discussed. And in all these emails that I have, especially in that core group of 400, lots of examples of, and it's crazy because they kind of drifted away. You know, it's like the members of the band just kind of, you know, everybody went in a different direction. And that's common. It affected the friendship that I had with Toby. And, you know, like if a group of family members has an event, it'll become like the family secret. No one will talk about it. And if, you know, 30 years down the road, Uncle Joe brings it up at, you know, Thanksgiving dinner, everyone will feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I know when I went public with this, I felt like I was violating some kind of trust, some kind of fiduciary, you know, family secret or something. And I think we're wired that way. I think that they can wire us to feel that way.
Did you talk to him about it before you published the book, or did he respond? Like your friend that was there with you?
Yeah, no, he's dead. Actually, he passed away September 4th, 2007. Yeah, I am too.
So I'm assuming that the different crafts might be different entities or different beings. But did you have the same sense of like a sense of familiarity? That's the right word. Like, did that feel familiar when you were, that feeling that you had when you were like experiencing with that triangular craft as you did with the crafts when you were 8 and 11, or did it feel different, like just completely different?
It felt different. It didn't feel like the same entities. It had a different feel to it. And I've had contact. I mean, I've seen UFOs most of my adult life.
Wow.
And sometimes there is a feeling of familiarity with them. Sometimes there's not. You know, my wife and I, last year we came out of she had a doctor's appointment. We went to the parking lot, and here's this huge silver disc in the sky. And I saw a woman standing by her car like this. So obviously she was checking it out. And I point to my wife and I'm like, look, can you see that? Like what? She couldn't see it. Could not see it.
Really?
That's why I keep my cell phone in my pocket and I take a photograph. Then she can see it, of course, but at the time,
So
can't
she
see
could
it.
see it on the photograph, but she couldn't see it in real time.
Correct. Everyone can see it. It's clear as day on the photographs when I photograph these things. But in the sky, she can't see them.
Whoa. That's weird.
That's bizarre. That is so bizarre. I mean, I've thought about that before, just how maybe there's a possibility that, you know, some people can't see things that other people can, but I've never actually heard a story where that's, you know, the case.
It's like dogs can see UV light or whatever, and we can't, that type of thing. Like some of us are evolved to like physically be able to process certain information in a certain way, and some people just can't.
Right. That's right.
Do you think that's more of like in your personal opinion, like something that it's down to the individual person, like it's me that can't see the thing, or is it that thing is doing something so that only a select few people can see it?
It's one of the two. I
Yeah.
mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly my thought. It's either cloaked and it wants to show itself to me and only me and the other lady in the parking lot, or, you know, something is different in me that I can see that. That's the only two explanations. So it's got to be one or the other.
Interesting.
Terry, what happened to you guys after you guys went to sleep?
Well, you know what? I'm glad you asked. I'll go on with that. I had no dreams. I mean, it was like being under anesthesia. I had no dreams, no thoughts. It was just lights out. And then I woke up to these crazy flashing lights through the canvas of the tent. Very, very similar to what I experienced at age 11. And the same colors, mostly, except no green. It was like mostly yellowish and white and maybe orange, but they were brilliant. They were as bright as a flash bulb going off. And they lit up the inside of that tent for a millisecond, but they lit it up like a ballpark at night, man. It was just very intense. And I wake up and I don't have my wits about me. I'm like, what? You know, and oh yeah, I'm camping with Toby. That's right. And I see these flashing lights and my mind's racing and I'm thinking, oh, this must be the overhead flashing lights of a park ranger's truck. Mm-hmm. It's the only thing I could think of that made sense. Now, this is where I first heard a noise. I heard a low droning sound that was not so much loud as it was powerful. It was like if you've ever stood next to a large piece of industrial machinery or an idling diesel locomotive up close, you can feel the power of the thing in your chest, but it doesn't necessarily hurt your ears.
Yeah,
That's what this noise was like.
Kind of like more of like a vibrational noise. Is that what you're kind of talking about?
Yeah, very much. Okay. You know, a big bass speaker at a concert. You know, that kind of thing. But yeah, vibrational, absolutely. So I heard that thing, and then I look down, I get up, and I'm still in that sedated state. I have no fear. And I saw my boots. I didn't bother to undress. I had my boots on still. And I looked down and my boots had been unlaced all the way down. And that confused me because, well, I mean, the military, they teach you to take care of your feet. The military, you know, I would never do that. And then I pulled my boots off because I know I didn't leave them that way. I know they were fully laced when I went to bed. And my socks were on sideways. And that really confused me because no way on earth would I have done that, you know? And so I'm annoyed, but I put them back on properly and laced them up and then turned my attention to Toby, who's to my immediate left. And he's on his knees and he's peeking out the flap in the tent. And Toby's African-American and he has tears, he'd been crying. And in the flash of white light, I think it's the saline in the tears, dried tears that reflected in the light. And I could see this white streak down the side of his face. And that freaked me out. So, you know, on the meter of calm to totally freaked out, I'm about at the halfway point now. I'm concerned, I'll put it that way. And I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers? What's out there? And he does the universal finger across the lips thing and says, shh, they're still out there. And I'm like, who's still out there? And I could see he wasn't taking questions. So I'm frustrated. I get on my knees and I look out my flap of the tent on the right side. And I could see two things. That this giant thing that had been 3,000 feet over our heads when we'd gone to bed had descended and now sits just 30 feet over the meadow. So we're camped off to the side, but it feels, because of the immensity of this thing, it feels like it's right on top of us. I don't know if I sent you a copy or not, but if you go to if you go to terrylovelace.com, there's a drawing that I made on it, a drawing that I made of the thing. That drawing is a redrawing of one that I made contemporaneous with the incident in 1977. So that's about as accurate of a depiction as you'll get. Wow. If you see the image on the website, there's you can see that my car, the tent, and Toby and I, two little stick figures, very tiny on the bottom on the left on the horizon if you look. And I did that to try to give some perspective as to the size of this thing. So that's what I noticed. It had dropped to an elevation of about 30 feet. And the second thing that I saw was in the flash of lights, because everything pretty much underneath the triangle there's no starlight to reach it, so it's just pitch black.
Yeah.
But in these flashes of light, I could see what I first took to be children. And that confused me. And I'm like, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out there in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? And he said, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And when he said that, that's when I went from, that's when I went to full-blown fear. I was terrified. I was terrified one of us would cough or do something and draw their attention, and they'd come over or do whatever to us. I had no way of knowing at that time. They were long done with us.
Yeah. Did you, at that point, did you have a memory of what had happened, or were you still kind of clueless as to what happened? You just, because of what he said, had that sense of fear.
What's crazy is as soon as he said that, I had a flash of memory from being inside that thing or being somewhere. I described this thing as being big as a medical building, but the memory of the thing that I was inside of was like an NFL stadium. It was much larger. And I found out that that's not uncommon too. I've had other people tell me that, maybe they have a different law of physics than we have, but the inside can be quadruple what it looks like from the outside.
Wow.
It was everything was stainless steel or white, and there were these little gray guys, which I have a theory about those, and I'm sure there are more than one species. But I got the distinct feeling that these things are not, they're not living like you and I are. They're certainly not sentient in the way that you and I are.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some kind of combination of maybe some biological material with quantum computing, AI, nanotechnology, who knows what. But I think they're manufactured. I don't think they're living.
Yeah, that's a pretty common theory too. The idea that, the aliens or the extraterrestrials or whatever entity it is that we want to call it, but when they come here, it's the idea that there's some sort of like AI or some kind of almost like a computer system to a degree, like a created object, because obviously we don't know enough concretely, but if they don't have the ability to travel faster than light between places, they would have to send something that could be alive for like really long periods of time and things like that, which is why people often talk about the idea that they might be like AI, because you would need something like that to travel mass distances, and maybe it's just consciousness that's inside of this AI to come down, something like that.
Yes. That reminds me, I'm glad you mentioned that. That reminds me, do you remember the 2019, there was a rock that was flying through the solar system.
Oumuamua?
Oumuamua, yeah.
Yeah.
Avi Lowe, I think is his name, the Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, he's coming out with a book, January 26th, that I can't wait to read.
I want to read that. He just did a podcast with Lex Friedman, and it was incredible. And he talks all about Oumuamua, yeah.
He believes that is more likely than not a scout ship or something, extraterrestrial in nature.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating the way he talks about the orbit of it, and like how he comes to the conclusion that it wasn't that it had to have been kind of like placed here or intentionally like put here, and that it wasn't. He goes into a lot of depth on the reasons why he thinks it's a non-natural occurring object, and he also thinks that that's one of a vast many that are near here.
And hard science. Speaking of which, I read an article in the Jerusalem Post on December 8th, December 8th, 2020, about Dr. Haim Eshed. Eshed spelled E-S-H-E-D. Haim spelled H-A-I-M. Dr. Haim Eshed. My friends, I have friends in Tel Aviv, and they tell me that this guy is on the respect level. He's up there with Buzz Aldrin in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
He ran their space, their entire space project, like their version of NASA. Plus, he ran a space protection, to protect the airspace above Israel for 30 years. and was highly decorated for his efforts, and then taught at university for another 10. He's in his 80s now. And normally 80-year-old people with a distinguished background don't make up fairy tales,
Mm-hmm.
And he came out and made a public announcement that the United States and Israel together have a treaty signed with ET, actually a collection of ETs. So it's like a galactic, he used the word galactic federation, which I didn't care for. I'm not a science fiction fan, but I think that kind of has a science fiction-y kind of.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, because of Star Wars. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that devalues it. So I wish he'd chosen a different choice of words, but.
It's probably the easiest way to get to the most common, like the person that doesn't have a more complex way or knowledge of words to describe that. Like Galactic Federation at least puts into context for most people kind of the idea. I think it has a sinister ring to it, but people can kind of get the idea that it's probably like an organized group of entities that are traversing space.
Yes. And then again, too, there may be a language issue here because I don't know how Federation translates directly from Hebrew to English. It's probably has a couple different readings. But anyway, that's pretty crazy. He said that not only Israel is aware, the United States is aware. They were both parties to a treaty, and that Donald Trump had planned to make a nationwide announcement, disclosure, and that ET convinced him not to. So I'd like to have been a party to that conversation.
Yeah, no kidding. We'll see. I bet it happens around July 8th time frame.
Yeah.
That's kind of when I'm thinking that things will happen. That's about 180 days after the Pentagon is supposed to release all their UFO documents. There's this crazy old Reddit thread of this person that created this Reddit account. This happened 7 years ago. This person created this Reddit account, made this long, multi-paragraph post talking about their abduction stories and their contact with extraterrestrials, basically from the time they were 4 or 5 years old and mid 80s all the way up to present. Happens every 4 years or whatever, 2 or 4 years. And he was saying in one of the middle paragraphs, he had mentioned that the extraterrestrials or the entities that were abducting him and dealing with him had also somehow conveyed to him that they were gonna. He used the term again. I think it's a language. It's a. We don't have the right words for it, but he used the term disclose and occupy our planet. July 8th or 18th, 2021. Now he said this 7 years ago and then never accessed his Reddit account ever again. It's never been accessed again. He created it, or whatever created it, she created it, published this thing, and then never went back onto Reddit again. And then here we are now, after we have this thing that shows the signing of that the Pentagon has to release all these UFO documents. That 180-day mark lines up to be the same week as that July 8th, 2021 thing that he had talked about 7 years ago.
So I could just probably Google Reddit story July 8th.
You would have, you would have to be able to. If not, I can send you the link. I have it, and I have it saved in my
okay,
stuff.
I'll do a little search first. If I can't find it, I'll give you a shout. Yeah. But, well, you know what? That 180 days to disclosure makes me scratch my head because I read the draft of the Senate bill. It's easily accessible, or the House bill, I should say. What's going to change in 180 days? Something's supposed to change in 180 days to make it. They can disclose it in 180 days, but they can't disclose it now. And what troubles me is the nexus between COVID and the date of disclosure. That that's not just doesn't seem like just an arbitrary date. There seems to be a connection there that makes me a bit uncomfortable. But
yeah, well, the fact that it's even part of a COVID relief bill is a little. It's just a weird thing to add into a thing that has nothing to do with that.
Well, that doesn't trouble me quite so much because I know a little bit about legislation. I wrote some legislation for the Samoan territory. And I know that when you write a bill, it's common that lawmakers will throw all these collective bills that they have together in like a package. So you may have disparate, may have things that are absolutely not interconnected with one another. So that in itself is not all that unusual, I don't think. But this one is unusual. I mean, because of the content, the timing.
It'll be pretty interesting to see what happens around summertime this year.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Okay, so back to your story.
Yes.
Sorry, I really derailed the conversation there. Sorry. So now you notice that he seems visibly shocked. You got this realization that you guys had been abducted, I guess is probably the best word to do it, or transported to another location and had all this stuff. You guys are looking at this object outside of the tent. So what happens now? Does that object leave, fly away, and you guys just kind of go on, or?
Well, here's what happened. We watched them, and again, we're trying to be just not make a sound, and we're just looking, the smallest little crack in the canvas to look out, and they eventually, I don't know how long, both of our watches were wind-up mechanical watches, which was the norm at the time, but they were good watches because they were integral to being an EMT. You needed a watch, and my watch stopped at 240. His stopped at 241. So, and never ran again. Matter of fact, my watch was still under warranty. It was an Elgin, and I sent it back to the Elgin Watch Company in Illinois, and said, "Hey, this thing is 6 months old and it's dead." They mailed me the watch back with a letter. God, I wish I'd kept both, and I didn't. They mailed me a watch back and said, "You voided your warranty by being near an electromagnetic field."
Oh, wow. That's a common thing that I've heard of, watches stopping, like with abductions and clocks. Even just sightings. Yeah, all clocks, time just like stopping.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's crazy.
It is crazy. As is you guys have heard well, I don't want to get too far afield here. Let me go back to what I was talking about. But one thing I want to mention is that I knew that we had to run to the car. And all I had over my head was a piece of canvas. But I was terrified at the prospect of running from the tent to the car because I knew we'd be vulnerable. We'd be out in the open. And to this day, I won't cut across an open field. I'll walk a mile and a half out of my way around it to get to where I'm going. But no, I won't be out in an open field. Not crazy about being out at night either. But,
yeah, I imagine.
So PTSD-ish behavior. Yeah. So we saw this thing take off. And it didn't take off like a rocket ship. And it didn't go from 0 to 500 miles an hour. It just, all it did was lift off like a hot air balloon. And it rose up into the sky and it rotated just a little bit. And the higher it got, the faster it got. And the lights, that humming noise, that droning noise stopped. And I should tell you what happened to the little guys.
Oh, yeah.
So let me back up. While I notice these little guys walking around, we're watching them. And they're walking around, and they're more like tourists or something. It's not like they're walking around looking for something lost on the ground or anything. But in the flashes of light, we can see them clearly. They're maybe 3 feet tall. Their heads are disproportionate to their body. I mean, they're textbook, little gray guys, right? Spindly limbs, very small torso. But they did walk with an unusual gait. That I noticed that. They had a strange walk. I don't know if maybe our gravity is different or what, but they walked with a distinctive gait. While we're watching them, there came another column of light from the same place directly in center. But of course, now this thing is so low, we really can't get a good look at the underside of it anymore. But there came a column of light that was about 30 feet in diameter, because it was about the same diameter as this thing was tall off the metal. And it had that same white visible quality to it that beam of light had that landed in our campfire. And we watched these little guys who were paired up in 2s and 3s, maybe a dozen, maybe 15. I wish I'd counted them, but I didn't. They would walk into this light and then just pixelate up, just dissolve. And then as soon as they were gone, 2 or 3 more would step in together, and then they would pixel out over the course of maybe 10 seconds. And we watched until the last 2 little guys stepped into the light and were gone. And then as soon as they were gone, that droning noise stopped and that light turned off. And the lights on the point of the triangle switched from multicolored to all white. And if you look at my drawing off terrylovelace.com, you'll see that I refer to the lights on the points of the triangle as being a light bar. And it seemed like a light fixture that ran all the way up, as tall as the thing was. And this little beam of light would run up and down that bar. And I thought, I bet that's what gives it the illusion of that it's a twinkling star when it's in the sky. So
Yeah.
it's intentional cloaking, deception, whatever. So we watched the thing take off. And in the meantime, my friend had hyperventilated and he finally was getting over that. And then he gets his head together and he's like, look, man, we got to get out of here. We have to go. And I said, yeah, I agree. And he says, do this, grab your car keys and your wallet. He said, I've grabbed my flashlight and my wallet. He says, look, on the count of 3, let's just bolt out of here and go to the car and get the hell out of here. And I'm like, I'm in, let's do it. And we did. We got to the car. Luckily, it started up right away. That was a big fear. Turned on the inside light, checked underneath the seat in the back seat because we were fearful something may have gotten in there, right?
Yeah.
We were alone. And thankfully, due to Toby's notes and his unerring sense of direction, we were able to get off the meadow and get back to Blacktop. And we were both hurt. We both had, Toby wasn't sunburned per se, but he was burned. I had the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life. I never burned, I never peeled, but I was beet red under my arms, the scalp of my head, the soles of my feet. I mean, everywhere I was burned.
Weird.
And we both had what's called flash burns. It's what it is it's a sunburn to the cornea of your eye. It's what a guy doing arc welding would get if they didn't pull the hood down to shield their vision. And that's very painful, especially it makes you very photophobic. So we had no way of telling time. And my 66 Chevy didn't have a working clock, obviously. So we got, we were kind of driving blind. But I'll tell you, it wasn't long we were on the highway and the sun came up and made it real difficult to focus. And you know what? You mentioned earlier about, 2 people go through this shared event. Human nature is to debrief. I mean, to validate each other's experience and to just debrief, did you see this? But there was none of that. The only conversation that we had was we agreed that we would not talk about the UFO. We both had this thing about we didn't want to lie. We wanted to be honest. So we decided that what we would do is we would tell them, if asked why because we knew we were going to have to go to the hospital. We were that badly hurt. What happened to you? Well, we went to bed feeling sick and woke up feeling much sicker and decided to come back. So we'll just leave out the middle part. That way we could do that with integrity and not feel like we're lying. And that's what we did. So from 1977, if I'd have told them I'd seen this, UFO, they'd have put me in a psych ward. No question.
Okay. So that's what my question was, is like, what was the purpose behind just, you were afraid of the fallout of it?
Absolutely.
When did you tell anybody until you wrote your book?
No, my wife and I were the only ones. I've never told a soul.
Wow.
I didn't want that to spread. I mean, I worked for state government, and I didn't want to, and others. And in my position, I could, if that got out, I'd been fired. I'd have been fired. I had no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like there would have been some media attention behind your story, and I mean, possibly, and then that probably just wouldn't have.
That would have been very unwelcome by my employer, I got to tell you. So,
yeah.
We have 2 adult children. My wife and I have been married 46 years, I think.
Well,
anyway,
awesome.
So she's the only one that we talked about, and we decided not to tell our children. I mean, why cause them anxiety?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they knew Dad would have screaming nightmares once or twice a year, but they never knew the reason why. And then in 2018, when I went to publish the book, I went in, I sat down with both of them, and I said, I never really told you guys this, but, and of course, they're both scientists, wouldn't you know it?
Of course.
And it's like, did you get this peer reviewed, Dad? Well, no, it doesn't lend itself to peer review, but my daughter is like, well, I love you, you're still Dad, but I don't know about this. And my son, on the other hand, was a little bit freaked out and admitted that when he was about a freshman in high school, about 9th grade, he had something happened that he wrote off as a dream. But it was, he doesn't think it was a dream. And that was, he woke up and outside his door in the hallway, he saw a little gray guy sticking his head around the corner. And he believes that was a real event. So.
Man, that's freaky. I mean, I've dreamt about how freaky that would be to see a little alien, peeking around the corner. I mean, you walk into a dark hallway, and that's like, as a younger adult, when I was younger, that was like one of the first thoughts that came to my head. It was like, what if something pops out from around the corner? And that would just be super scary.
Absolutely, super scary.
Yeah. Did you tell anybody? So you didn't tell anybody when after this event happened? Did it? Man, so it's fascinating to think that you had a contact or an interaction with possibly 2 different entities, like 2 different possible species of entities, and they still managed, you still had the opportunity to experience that. Did you have anything after that moment, like that experience? Did it go away, or do you have them kind of regularly?
Kind of regularly. I mean, at odd intervals. It's an episodic type thing. It's not on any schedule. But I really had no intention of ever talking about this until 2012. In 2012, I retired from the state of Vermont in January of 2012. And in October of that year, I woke up one morning and I couldn't bear weight on my right leg. And I told my wife something's wrong with my knee. I got to go to the doctor. So I get all my medical care from the VA. So I went to the ER and, waited my turn and got in. And they did an x-ray on my leg and they were like, And they took another set and another set. And the tech asked me, have you ever suffered a shrapnel wound, or do you have a car accident or anything where you could account for a piece of metal being in your body?
What?
And I'm like, no, nothing. And
you have pictures of this on your website, right?
I do. Pictures from above and below. And if you look at them, if you look at the one above, it has a very electronic look to it. It's a square structure that's obviously man-made or, made by some intelligence with 2 wires attached. And then below my knee, there's a floret pattern of what looks like bone tissue, down right down to a little dot in the middle, And when I was in the X-ray room, mention real quick, that thing above my knee, the one that has the electronic look to it, that lies directly underneath the spot where I started running. I was a runner. I started in 1980. I got out of the Air Force in 1979. Started gaining weight from just being a student, and decided running was kind of a craze back then. A guy named Jim Fix, FIXX, wrote a book, The Joy of Running or something, and he called it jogging, and it kind of became caught on. I mean, it's weird to think about, but prior to that, I mean, you didn't see anybody running in public. I mean, unless, you know, a cop
There was
chasing
no
them.
jogging.
It didn't exist. I mean, you know, maybe kids
Wild.
out on doing cross country, but, you know, look at old photos, look at old movies. You never see anybody running in the park, never. So, but anyway, when I would run, I never ran marathons. I'd run, you know, anywhere from 2 to 5 miles a day after work, depending on my mood and how I felt. And there's that spot above my knee and lateral to the right would go completely numb. An area about the size of a $50 or a toonie would go completely numb. And I could take a pen and delineate the edges to it. It was perfectly round, and it was numb and kind of itchy, like a shot of Novocaine in your mouth. And I thought, oh, that's weird. It would wear off after about 30 minutes. And I asked my doctor about it a couple years later, because I asked my running friends, and they had no clue. And my doctor said, yeah, it sounds like some kind of histemic reaction. You know, probably nothing to worry about. So nothing to worry about. That's what I did. I didn't worry about it for, you know, 40 years. And then I had this x-ray. And I had asked the doctor, I said, look, can I see my x-rays? Show me what the structures you're looking at. And he said, yeah, sure. So he puts them up on a view box for me. And the second I saw that one above my knee, I knew it was right underneath that numb spot. And that was like a slap in the face. That was really, when I saw that, I knew that these things had put their hands on me. And at least once, and probably many times. And the doctor said, you know, the things below my knee that had a floret pattern to it, he said on x-ray film, these things have the density of bone tissue. And then he says, but I think not, because I've never seen bone tissue sprout in the middle of a muscle, much less arrange itself in a symmetrical pattern. So he said, I don't know.
Did you get it taken out?
Well, that's an interesting story too. I tried. The first thing that I wanted to do was get it taken out.
Yeah.
And I ran into a problem in that I went to see a surgeon, and a surgeon's like, cool, yeah, let's take these out. You know, and I insisted, you know, so I want them out, but I want to follow a forensic protocol. I want a clear chain of custody. I want to have a witness handy. So they pass from my body to your hand, to my, either me personally or to my witness. And everybody signs off, and he's like, yeah, I've taken out bullets. I know how to do a forensic protocol. And so I established we're going to do that. And he says, all you got to do is, he says, get me a cardiac clearance letter. Because he saw in my history, I'd had a heart attack in 2005, and then a second in 2011. And that's when they put a stent in my heart. So I went to see my cardiologist, my regular cardiologist through the VA. And she's like, you know, I can't write a clearance letter for you. I can't grant clearance because these things are in your body and they appear to be benign, and it's a risk-benefit analysis, and the surgery is more potentially harmful than the benefit you'd get from removing them. And I kind of said, look, you know, this is my body. I want these things out of here. And I kind of went off, and she's like, you know, calm down. She says, look, you know, you're a vet. You know, there's probably 500,000 vets walking around out there with shrapnel in their body. They want it out too, you know. They want it out right now, but we don't do that. And it's the medical term for it is standard of care. And the standard of care in this country is, if it's benign and it's been there for years, let it lie. So I saw 3 VA cardiologists, and then a couple on my own dime in the civilian community. And the answer is the same, because the standard is the same across the nation.
Looks like you might have to take a trip to Mexico.
Wow. Did you hit the nail on the head? Honest to God. In 2017, in October 2017, my wife and I are talking to a guy in Tijuana. And we're planning a trip, you know. I thought, you know, go down and get some dental work done too, you know. And
you got to do it. You got to do it.
I mean,
well, here's what happened.
Knocked out one shot.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. And I explained this in the last chapter of Incident at Devil's Den. And this kind of sounds so outrageous that a lot of people are like, oh, and but I swear to you that this is the truth. I don't think Dr. Bruce would be my friend if I were making stuff up. I mean, I'm this stage of my life, I'm not making up fairy tales.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I woke up third week in October of 2017, and I opened my eyes, and I'm shocked because I'm seated upright in the chair in my living room, the one I normally occupy. And I'm like, whoa. And I look to my left, I glance to my left because I can see the alarm panel and everything is set. I look to my right, and the cat's on the windowsill. And then directly across from me is a petite Asian woman at first glance.
Whoa.
Dressed all in black, except for a red scarf tied around her neck because her neck is pencil thin. She's wearing like these black nursing shoes with about a 2-inch heel. And she has a blouse on that has extra long sleeves that cover, sticking out are just 4 long, ugly fingers. And she has on this black wig. And it's this cheap, weird black wig. And it's sitting on top of her head, but it's askew because she has this big, bulbous back of her head. And she's wearing, she has no ears to speak of. So I guess the arms of the sunglasses are jammed up underneath this wig. And she has on these huge black sunglasses. I know.
I could just picture the entities like coming down here, and before they get to your house, they're like, oh, but let's go to Party City real quick and grab this wig so this dude's not so freaked out.
Oh my God. I mean, it's just, and it's just like, real quick, it's just like with the monkey men, mm-hmm. These entities appear to children in the form of owls and clowns and orbs and possums and, all kinds of things that make their stories so outrageous that no adult's going to believe them. I think they have 2 purposes. They appear in a way the child will think is most benign, non-threatening, and then they make the story so bizarre nobody will buy it.
Yep.
So this woman seated across from me, I'll tell you, at first glance, she could walk down the streets of Chicago and not draw a second glance. But her wig is on askew because the back of her head, the big bulbous back of her head, it's made for a human head, not for whatever she is. Mm-hmm. And my first thought was, I wish she'd take off those glasses. And like on cue, she reaches up and takes her glasses off. And then she took the wig off. And I knew her. And I did have this familiarity with her. And this was the woman and she hadn't aged a day, that I knew as Sue when I was between the ages of 4 and 7. She was the one in the playroom when the monkey man would take me. This was the same entity. I called her Sue back then because she reminded me of, we had a neighbor who was Japanese. She'd married a GI who was in Japan post-World War II. And all this neighborhood kids called her Sue. So that's what I called her back in the day when I was a child. But on this visit, because this black wig was askew, I called her Betty because she reminded me of Betty Rubble from the Flintstone cartoons. But I pretty much discerned right away that, this is one and the same entity. And I was glad to see her. Yeah. I was really glad to see her.
Was that the only other time that you've seen her other than your first experience with her?
That's the second time. That was the second time I'd seen her as a child. And this 2017 was the second time. I had another visit from her on November 21st of 2019 that I haven't shared very much. I shared in my second book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning. Mm-hmm. And she told me, she said, she never used the word COVID, but she said, the world will change on February 1st. And on February 2nd, it'll be, quote, a new world.
Hmm.
I met Whitley Strieber in 2019, June 2019, I think. Yeah, June 2019 at Pine Ridge, the Native American Dakota Reservation in South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And we met there, a bunch of us met there. Yvonne Smith and Lucy, a couple of Bruce's good friends, that both live in LA, were there. Yvonne does hypnotic regression. She's licensed hypnotherapist and has been doing hypnotic regression on people like me, experiencers for 30 years. She just celebrated her 30th anniversary.
Cool.
So I met Whitley there, and Whitley wrote a new book that he published in December, I believe, of 2019, and it's called A New World.
Mm.
What happened? Like, can you talk a little more in detail about that experience? Because I'm curious as to how it happened.
Yeah, let me finish the October 2017 experience real quick.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I'll go to 2019. October, again, I woke up in my chair. She's seated across from me. She looks like an Asian woman dressed in black with a funky black wig, large black sunglasses. And we spoke telepathically. And it felt very familiar to me. It felt like being back with her as a child. And I asked, by thought, I asked her, why are you in my living room? And she replied, it's nice to see you again. And so she dodged the question. And I rephrased it and said, does this have anything to do with the thing in my leg? And she says, yes. And I said, what does this thing do? And she dodged the question again and said, it has many purposes. And she says, if you try to, that can't be taken out and fall into the hands of terrestrial scientists for analysis. That can't happen. And she says, if you try to have that done and pursue having that done, and if you continue to speak publicly about it, my host, she referred to them as her host. Now, host is an interesting word because it can be a noun or a verb. You can be a host of a dinner party, or you can be a verb. You can host a dinner party. So I'm confused, and I'm saying, well, who are your hosts? What are you talking about? And she made kind of an elegant statement, and she said, you refer to them as aliens. I refer to them as my host. They're not alien to me. I thought, geez. So she is evidently some kind of hybrid being. She's not ET herself, but but she came there to warn me not to do that. And I proceeded with the plans to get it removed, and I proceeded with writing my book. And she told me that my government would not be happy with me if I published the book, and she was right about that. They weren't very happy with me.
Yeah.
Care less. The more local I am, the more visible I am, the safer I am.
Governments tend to be not too happy with anything that is even remotely close to true.
Yeah. So she told me some other things too. I don't have time to go into.
Maybe on another episode.
Maybe on another episode we'll do it. And then 2019, I'm in my room. I'm in my study where I am now, and I'm typing, writing, and it's 3:33 in the morning. That triple digit thing, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to who Robert Hastings is, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert and I talk often. Matter of fact, he's writing a foreword for my book that I got to get from him and republish. But he has that triple digit effect happen to him often, where he wakes up and the first thing he sees is triple digits.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, the past week I have been seeing triple digits like crazy. And I've always linked it to something, I don't know, maybe I'm like doing the right thing, or maybe I'm on the right path. I don't know. I've just I notice when I see them a lot, and I have been seeing them a lot.
You know, my undergrad degree is in psychology, and I always go back to Carl Jung every time I think about this. And it's symbolic of something.
Yeah.
So I think I agree with you. You know, it's not just coincidence. I mean, it happens so often it goes beyond the pale of coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
My wife got so freaked out at it that we can't, she got rid of the analog clock. The digital clock. We got to have an analog clock in the bedroom now, you know?
So it always looks different.
Yeah. I mean, I can reach over and look at my phone and I'll still see the triple digits, but at least she won't. So anyway, 2019, I'm in that, both times that this happened, I was in that sedated mode. Again, that calm, no hysterical place. And I'm in my study and I look over and I saw it was her. And I reached over to my keyboard and I typed in 333 because I was on a Word document. And I wanted to preserve the time and kind of somehow memorialize the event. And that's when she spoke to me telepathically and said, the world is going to change. February 1st, the world will change. February 2nd, it will be a new world. And at first, I took it to be a real positive encounter, thinking, oh boy, you know, maybe something really cool is going to happen. Maybe disclosure, maybe something very good's going to happen. And that was my feeling. The next day, I was almost euphoric. But, you know, by 10 a.m., I got this sad feeling, emotion come over me. And I had the thought, whatever it is, it ain't going to be good. Whenever I have an encounter, whether I see something in the sky or whether I see something in my study, there's always a period thereafter where I have, I'll just call it heightened intuition. And in January, I went out, I bought, my wife thought I lost my mind. I put motion detectors and lights outside the house. I had an 8-foot stockade fence put around the backyard. Wow. I started buying food and water. And I didn't want to freak her out or tell her that I was concerned, but I was concerned that something terrible was coming.
Yeah. I
did this in January. You know what else I did that's hard to explain? January 31st. I sold a boatload of stock. And I'm not a financial guy. You know, I'm not. I mean, I take care of my family, but I'm not you know. Anyway, I had owned General Electric, Coca-Cola, some of the General Motors, some of the, you know, the basics in stock. I sold them all. And I bought Gilead, Moderna, Pfizer, Abbott Labs, and one more I can't think of the name of. I bought 5 pharmaceutical stocks, dirt cheap. I mean, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
So I think that's a gift from her.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, did you? So whatever happened with this thing in your knee? Are you? Are you gonna?
They came and they took it out.
They took it out.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's not there anymore?
It's not. Well, it's not there. That deserves a brief explanation. I woke up on November 17th of 2019, roughly 3 weeks after Betty had visited, still making plans to go to Mexico. And I had this bruising on the top of my legs. And I think there may be pictures of that bruising on my website. That was immediately there after I woke up with it. I woke up in a lot of pain. Now, the bruise just didn't show up for 36 hours, but I had puncture marks on the top of both of my legs.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I told my wife, I said, they came and they got their merchandise last night. And she said, yeah, you got to get an x-ray. So like, well, you know, it's a Saturday. What am I going to do? I'm going to go out and get an x-ray. You know, and I know you can't go to a standing radiology clinic and say, I want an x-ray. So I had the forethought. I took photocopy paper. I took copies of my x-rays with me on paper. And I went to see a chiropractor. And I wait. I don't have an appointment. I'm there like 45 minutes. He's busy. And he calls me in and he says, "You've been in standard questions. You've been in an automobile accident. Have you been hurt? You know, what happened?" No. Why are you here? And I said, "Doc, I'm going to be real candid with you. In 1977 or thereabouts, I was abducted, and somewhere in my past, I had an implant from ET, and I think they came and removed them last night. So I need an X-ray to find out if they're still there." And before I can finish my sentence, he has me by the elbow on the right arm, and he's walking me to the front door, because he thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah.
But I know chiropractors look at probably 100 X-rays a week.
Mm-hmm.
So I pick up the piece of paper and I'm holding it like this in front of his face with the X-ray. And he finally gives it his attention and he stops. And he said, "Come with me." And he turns around and he took me into his office and shut the door. Now his phone's ringing, people are knocking at the door. And he lays out both pieces of paper side by side. I'm on the other side of his desk, obviously. And he says, "In a capsule version, tell me about these." So I gave him a 90-second overview of what happened to me. And he says, "Let me see. Take your pants down. Let me see the wounds." And I showed him the puncture wounds that I had. And he says, "Yeah, you woke up with these?" And yeah, I woke up with them. He said, "Yeah, they're fresh." Yeah. And I pulled my pants back up. He says, "I don't have much time, but," and he wrote a script. He said, "I don't have X-ray equipment here. I use a freestanding facility down the road." And he wrote me a script and said, I'll get you X-rays. I'll pay for them, but I want to see them." And he said, "You just do me one favor. I'll do this for you. You do not use my name or the name of my clinic." Mm-hmm. And I said, "That's very fair, Doc. Thank you very much." I know that this guy was an experiencer. He was either an experiencer or he had seen something on X-ray that led him to believe that this was reality. Mm. So I went in and I got an X-ray. On the X-ray, the thing is gone. And I'm kind of saddened, but then I dropped the X-rays off at his office, and he calls me up at dinner time that evening, and he says, "Well, did you see your X-rays?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you saw they left something in you." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." Well, he had the X-rays. I didn't have them, so I couldn't see what he was talking about until I got them back from him. I have them. They're in my possession still. I won't bother to pull them out. But anyway, he said, "Parallel with your femur and mid-thigh, there are two tiny wires." And I'm confused. And I'm like, "Well, let me ask you this, Doc. If what we're dealing with here is some kind of extraterrestrial intelligence that's, 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder from me, how could they be so stupid? And he said, "They're not inept. They don't do anything by accident." He said, "What they did probably was give you an upgrade. That's probably a 2017 model of the 1977 one they removed."
That's kind of what I was thinking when you said that they left something in you. It was like, well, they must have just switched out devices or something.
Yeah, and they're still there. They're still on X-ray. They're two tiny wires. Nobody's excited about removing them for me because they're so deep. They're lying next to my femur. And I talked to an interventional radiologist who said he could maybe go in with a needle device and maybe extract one of them or something. But I decided not to have that done because I got a feeling if you remove it, it's going to be something, maybe something exotic, maybe not. But I don't care to go through the procedure.
Oh man, yeah, that'd be tough. You've had it for a long time. It'd be hard to. Yeah, plus all that pain and stress. I don't know if I'd have like a burning curiosity to find out if I'd need to like see it or if I'd be okay with it just being in there, man.
Well, the things below my leg, the floret thing, those are still there. They're
really
100% undisturbed. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what those are?
No
idea. Huh?
Every radiologist, now I've had probably 20 radiologists look at my X-rays. And the thing below my knee, they say that they can tell the density of it is that of bone tissue. But again,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, man. Holy cow. That's a lot to process. That's insane. And do you still, so 2019, you had this experience. Have you had anything since then?
No.
Do you think he will? Are you like at this point? Do you think? Are you expecting to have another visit at some point? Do you think?
I am actually. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'll never see her again. That thought makes me kind of sad. I mean, I'd like to see her again. I also have a feeling that we're not half done. That there's a lot in motion right now.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot more secure now that I'm, kind of have some element of self-sufficiency. I mean, you guys are in a good spot. I mean, you're in Montana. I don't know if you're in Butte or if you're.
Yeah, we're in Missoula. Yeah.
Missoula. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I interviewed for a job there, actually, with a hospital a long time ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we are pretty lucky that we're in if something happens area, we have a good backyard that we can kind of escape to if we need to.
Yeah. I don't have that, but I've made it the best that I can make it. And, I'm in Texas, so of course I've got firearms. And,
yeah.
Of course.
It's sad to say that might be necessary.
Do you, I won't keep you too much longer, but, so, we were talking a little bit about the possibility of disclosure happening sometime soon, or these things becoming more and more prevalent in mainstream society. Did you ever get the feeling that they were here for other than good purposes? Like, and is there like an overwhelming fear that maybe they're, it could take more of a darker turn, or are they generally, in your opinion, nicer or at least not hostile?
Well, I just like human beings, I think there are good ones and there are bad ones. Mm-hmm. And, you hear all kinds of people. I go to these conferences and I hear people get up and tell crazy stories that they can't back with any kind of hard evidence, or really put together a believable story. Not that I'm here to judge anybody, the veracity of anybody's story, but and I don't like peddling fear. I don't like to be to spread fear, because there's certainly enough of that to go around. But
yeah, sure.
I think there's something else to happen, and I hope ET is on our side. I really do.
Yeah, me too. I don't think us humans are quite ready to. Well, I don't think we'd be technologically advanced enough to stand up too much.
My hero, Elon Musk, who I just think the world of, and thank every day for buying. I couldn't afford to buy the car, but I could afford to buy the stock back in the day.
Heck yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Elon Musk made an announcement that yesterday, I believe, that he plans to have 300,000 human beings on Mars by 2050.
Whoa.
That's 19 years from now.
That's crazy.
And my first thought was, man, I'm like in the steerage compartment on board the Titanic, everybody else is getting off the ship, and at least 300,000 people are, and where's my ticket? I don't know. But that tells me that that implies that it's going to be more pleasant on Mars, living in some geothermic, living under those conditions. It's going to be more pleasant on Mars than it will be here. That's the inference that I take away. It's only an inference.
Yeah. It's funny you say the year 2050 too, because we just had a conversation with Lynn Buchanan, who is a remote viewer, who is part of the military's like psychic program back in the day.
Yes.
And he was talking about that, and they still do it once a year. They get remote viewers to look ahead at the year 2050 specifically. And he was talking about how uninhabitable is going to be and some things that are going to happen in 2050. So it's kind of just a funny coincidence that he's also doing it in 2050. So
I'm taking a remote viewing class right now.
Are you? That's
really nice.
Cool.
So I just had my first class.
Okay.
Oh, that's so rad.
I know Simeon Hine. Do you guys know Simeon?
I don't.
Simeon Hine is a remote viewer. He's a PhD out of Colorado.
Cool.
He wrote a book, Black Swan, in reference to Ingo Swan, the famous remote viewer.
Okay.
Simeon is a very interesting guy. Has a show of his own, but he'd make a hell of a guest.
Yeah, I'd have to reach out to him.
Yeah,
well, look, man, this was awesome. I'm not really sorry, but sorry I took 2.5 hours of your time, but I appreciate you like having this conversation. That was
seriously
really awesome.
Well, no, I appreciate the opportunity to tell my story, and I thank you guys for the chance and the opportunity to be on. You've been great. I feel like I'm sitting in my living room talking to two guys. I mean, it's been a very great conversation.
Good.
Oh, fantastic.
Good.
And I'll keep in touch. I'd love to have you on again sometime and we can talk about some more stuff. I think these are all things that need to be talked about a lot. So.
Yep. Shoot me an email anytime. You know where I'm at.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments. We can relay them to Terry. Terry, we'll leave all your information. We'll put all links to all your books. We'll put links to your website, everything in the description so people can know where to find you.
Thank you.
Before we close down, do you have any last things you want to say?
Just peace, everybody.
Yeah, hell yeah. Peace. All right. See you guys.
Adios.
All right.